Several women have allegedly been reported to police over emails they sent to the Girl Guides Association concerning their policies over gender identity. One Twitter user said that she had been contacted by the police for a friendly chat after the woman had emailed Girl Guiding. She asked if anyone else had had a similar experience. Now, in the emails, people have been demanding clarification from Girl Guiding, the largest girl-only youth organisation in the UK, about new appointments of trans-identified male guide leaders. Some of the concerns around one leader is about the guide leader's social media activities, such as posting inappropriate pictures on Twitter, in one of them posing with a gun, in other pictures the leader's seen in sexualised poses. Now, joining me to discuss this issue, I have Graham Linehan, who's the comedy writer who co-created Father Ted and Black Books and the writer and director of The IT Crowd, and the barrister Sarah Phillimore. Welcome both. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
I'll come to you first, Sarah, if that's OK. This is a very complicated story, and I think a lot of people don't really know what is happening when it comes to girl guiding. And why is there any kind of controversy around this issue? What's happened?
We could talk for an hour. I'll try and keep it simple, assuming that a lot of people don't really understand what the hell is going on. I think we can trace this back to 2015, when Stonewall added the T for transgender to the LGB and made that part of their campaigning focus. The difficulty is, however, most people, I think, still consider transgender to mean transsexual.
Yes.
So a man who wanted to be a woman really put a lot of effort into it, including often surgery, to actually change their body. But then it's a very new thing that's developed. Most trans women appear to be men who have done nothing to their bodies by way of medication or surgery. They have simply declared themselves to be women, and the expectation seems to be that they will be treated as such.
And this is gender self-identity. So you say I'm a woman, and then people treat you as such.
It's the sleight of hand that has swapped sex for gender.
Yes.
And you could go back even further to Gender Recognition Act, which actually muddles up sex and gender in the same section.
Yes.
And apparently that was done quite deliberately to pave the way for this kind of confusion. Because obviously sex and gender are completely different.
Yes, I think people are very confused because when you ask people about trans rights, most people say, yes, of course, we're for equal rights for trans people, and that people can identify however they please, and they can change sex if they want to change sex and go through that procedure. And that I think is muddying the water, because this isn't about that, is it? Could you explain why safeguarding is an issue on this?
Well, that brings a slap up against safeguarding, because if you muddle up sex and gender identity, what happened was that the Girl Guides then said they were trans-inclusive, so they would welcome trans women. But if the trans women that they are welcoming don't have to make any changes at all to their male bodies, then you're effectively inviting men into a single-sex institution. And that's got implications, not just for safety, although clearly women are much more at risk of harm from men than men are from women.
Yes.
But it's also issues about dignity and providing a space for girls and women. So the two women who complained about that, I think, were just summarily chucked out of the organisation. Both took legal action. That's been rumbling on. And then it reared its head again with the activities of somebody, I think, very senior in the organisation, a guiding commissioner, who is a trans woman who I think has had breast surgery, so has some accoutrements of being a female, but remains a man, and has published online pictures in bondage gear, fetish gear, brandishing guns. And one woman who wrote to say, I'm a bit concerned about this, found her letter forwarded to the police, and she was interviewed under caution.
Yes.
And this is astonishing, and I don't understand why people aren't taking to the streets.
So we've got two issues here. So we've got the Girl Guide leaders themselves who were thrown out of the organisation for raising concerns about this, and we've got the parents who complained about seeing images of a scout leader, male anatomy, with guns and sexual pose. So whatever you think about, that could have been a party outfit, it could have been something in their private life, but the point is that for raising concerns, they were contacted by the police as a result of that.
The issue, it's not about being transphobic and saying, oh, it's a trans person, how distasteful. It's saying this is somebody willing to transgress boundaries in public, somebody who's working with children.
Yes.
I think the guides go all the way down to preschool. You're talking about possibly 4 up to 18.
Yes.
Willing to put that stuff out online. I assume that's part of the thrill of it. But people who were rightly saying, this is a bit concerning, found themselves accused of hate.
So that's the background. So, Graham, I want to bring you in here. Now, a lot of people will be thinking, why are you involved in this? You're a comedy writer, and yet you've written an awful lot about this. You really seem to be in the middle of this ongoing debate and have been for a while. How did this happen?
Well, I really would rather not be in it. Yeah. But the problem is that the problem is with a phrase like trans women are women, which is a lie. It basically saying men are women. Because as Sarah points out, the vast majority of people who have a trans identity have not done any meaningful transition. So you're actually saying that if someone says, I'm a woman, they can be allowed into Girl Guides, they can bring girls on overnight stays and things like this, and they will not be questioned. And what's extraordinary about it is that Girl Guiding's safeguarding procedures are actually very robust, until you get to this. Yes. Their safeguarding procedures, they don't just soften when it's a trans woman, they disappear. So they're literally saying that everyone who says, not does any kind of transition or anything like that, anyone who says, I'm a trans woman, will automatically be considered as a woman and will be considered not a safeguarding risk. So when organisations like that are not doing their job and not protecting children, then unfortunately, it's, I find I have to say...
Yeah, well, of course, I mean, but some people would counter that and say, well, look, are you trying to say that trans people are predators? That, that there's...
No, the problem is, like, one of the basic rules of safeguarding, and something we saw with the Catholic Church in Ireland and in Boston and in places like that, is that if you create a sacred class, a class that cannot be questioned, a class that is absolutely... considered, holy, which is how the left now consider anyone with a trans identity, yes. Then predators will identify into that class.
Yes.
Now, I'm not saying that's what's happened with Girl Guiding, but the problem is with this person is that, like, this person was obviously stupid enough to put photographs like that of them online. Photographs with guns, photographs in fetish gear. What about the quiet ones? Right. What about the ones who are smart enough not to publicise what's going on?
I sometimes think, do people not understand how safeguarding works? Insofar as I used to be a teacher, I had to go through checks and think, I didn't assume that meant they were accusing me of having paedophilic tendencies or anything like that. They check everyone because of the few who might exploit the system. That's the same here, isn't it?
The argument, you are saying this about all trans people, even though we are constantly having to say, no, we're not saying this about trans people. That is one of the ways they use to just escape scrutiny. Yes. And one of the things about this movement on the whole is that they every time it is exposed to any kind of scrutiny, for instance, most famously, I guess, is in the courts. As soon as the courts test these theories, they fall apart.
Yeah.
Because everybody, thankfully, the judges haven't been completely captured, even though there is a guidebook for judges that tells judges that if a rape victim, if a accused rapist is identifying as a woman, they must be addressed as she.
Even by the victim?
No, they've changed that. Right. But here's the thing. Imagine you're a woman who's been assaulted.
Yes.
And your assaulter is in the courtroom, and everyone is calling this person she. What will that do to you?
Sarah, can I bring you in on that?
Yeah, I was just about to interject, because that has actually been changed after outcry and protest.
Yes.
And there's now a bit in the Equal Treatment Benchbook to say you've got to be mindful of the victim's experiences, because asking a victim of rape by a male body with a penis to refer to that attacker as she is disconcerting, to say the least. So, but it just underscores how crazy this all is, because this is a very recent amendment, and for years we had this, Maria McLachlan, who had to call...
Maria McLachlan?
The large male-bodied person who came up behind her and knocked her to the ground. The judge was actually angry with her for not wanting to be enthusiastically calling this person she. And I think that's why she wasn't awarded much by way of damages, because the judge wanted to punish her for that.
Can I tell you a funny story about that? Tara Wolfe is the name of the person who attacked Maria McLachlan, punched her. Tara Wolfe is now kickboxing against males in Thailand.
Oh, no.
Right?
This is the individual who attacked...
This is the individual who attacked Maria McLachlan, who was, I think, about 60 years old at the time of the attack. 20-year-old guy attacking a woman is now fighting men in Thailand. But here's the funny thing.
Oh, sorry.
He said in an interview, I hope to be able to compete against women someday.
Wow. OK. Well, look, I mean, this story that you've just told, I think, gives us an insight into the way in which women who either raise concerns or often they become attacked for doing so or smeared as hateful, smeared as transphobic. I want to make this point about, because I was contacted the other day by a parent who wishes to remain nameless. She's a teacher. She has a daughter in the Girl Guides and was concerned about what she described as a biological male who posted sexual content on social media being in a position of trust in Girl Guiding. And those are the images we saw earlier. And she'd emailed her concerns to Girl Guiding UK, was reported to the police, she doesn't know by whom. An officer from Merseyside Police apparently called on her home on January the 7th. She was invited to interview under caution at the police station to discuss an investigation under the Malicious Communications Act. She was told that this meeting was voluntary, but she could be arrested if she refused to go through with it. So she went to the interview with the solicitor, and she says that she was aware that the hate crime guidance in this country stipulates that no evidence of the hate element is required. It's just about perception of the victim, which is what they call complainants now. And she said to the officer specifically, would they investigate anyone that anybody reported in this way? And she was told, yes, they would. Sarah, can I ask you, as a barrister, is this lawful?
No. It's clearly unlawful. And what's really, really frightening is we've just had a Court of Appeal decision to confirm that it is unlawful. Now, I didn't expect the police to embrace this with enthusiasm, but I certainly didn't expect them to double down.
So can I ask you, because there's been lots of reports on Twitter, and it's anecdotal reports about people being contacted by police simply for raising concerns about people in Girl Guiding.
I've seen the email, I believe, of the person that you're talking about, and that made me so angry. I took to Twitter myself. I wrote a short email to Girl Guiding and said, I've also got concerns. My local police force is Wiltshire. I'd really like to know whether you or they think I've done anything criminal in raising these concerns. Because people need to start getting angry. These are fundamental human rights that we are letting slip away. Our police appear to be out of control. There's a Court of Appeal ruling on the 20th of December confirming what Harry Miller always said, the hate crimes guidance was unlawful because it was a disproportionate attack on our Article 10 rights. What this woman has done, I've read the email, there is nothing insulting or abusive. She doesn't even misgender the person. She simply says, I am concerned. Now, she may be completely wrong to be concerned, but the response of any respectable organisation should be, we hear you, we take it seriously, we'll investigate. Oh, no, actually, we don't agree with you. And I was just chatting with Graham outside. We've come full circle. I was piqued. I became an activist after what the NSPCC did back in 2019, when an employee of theirs, dressed in some sort of rubber fetish gear, masturbated at work, filmed it, and provided a link to the video on his LinkedIn profile. And various
incredible
people
the things that you're only finding out about now.
Concern that this was happening in the offices of a children's charity. The NSPCC, I think they had 70,000 followers, tweeted, anyone who comes at us with this homophobic nonsense, we will report you. So I wrote to them and I said, you can't do this. Please tell me that you're not going to behave like this or I will report you to the Charity Commission. They ignored me. So I reported them to the Charity Commission and I heard through the grapevine that there was a meeting between someone at the NSPCC and the Charity Commission. You see, it's not just our rights being taken away, it's our ability to even recognise the problem and try and deal with it. So that's what piqued me all those years ago, and we're coming full circle and we're still talking about it. Why aren't people angry?
So I'm baffled about that, because no one was saying these individuals can't, their private sex life is their own business. This is someone who's posting things, and he was actually engaging in sex acts in the office of the NSPCC.
I'm not sure if he meant to link it to his LinkedIn profile,
Maybe
but
not.
That's how it was found.
Yes.
And of course, I was accused of homophobia and all sorts. And I said, look, people's sexual activities are their business, not mine. Whatever floats your boat, whatever consenting adults want to do in private is up to them. I am not a homophobe. I'm not a transphobe. But if you're working for the NSPCC, you should not be taking time in your working day to behave in that way, and people are allowed to complain.
You would think that was all self-evident, right, Graham?
Can you imagine what would have happened? Like, there were two Girl Guiding leaders who have lost their positions in Girl Guiding because of this, because they complained about this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is one of the strongest reprimands that can happen to a Girl Guiding leader.
And because they've been accused of transphobia
yes,
for raising the concerns.
Yes. And these can you imagine if either of those two women posed in photographs like the ones you showed at the start of this thing? The reason that he gets away with it, excuse me for misgendering, but the reason he gets away with it is because these things that he's doing, into fetishism, into guns, are male qualities, generally. And the thing is, he is exercising the purest example of male privilege by being allowed to get those photographs online. And GirlGuiding are still fighting his corner.
So it's interesting that you mentioned there about misgendering, because I know that, for instance, Kate Scott, I think, was an example. People have been arrested for misgendering for their own free speech. Now, you yourself, and I think it's fair to say you got involved in all of this, you've had police contact you.
3 times police have contacted me.
And is that how you sort of got involved in all, because
No, that was just a result of talking about it.
Just even talking about it openly in public?
One was the disgraced Dr. Adrian Harrop, who's recently received a suspension for 1 month. Another was Stephanie Hayden, who was also the person who targeted Kate Scott out.
Yes.
These are there's a small group of very smart but very dangerous men who are trying to escape scrutiny, who are trying to control the narrative, and they will use the police. And what's most frustrating about this is I know from talking to Harry Miller of Fair Cop that the rank and file do not agree with this stuff. They don't.
This is what confuses me. Now, we've got this issue with the police, who are persisting, as you've said, Sarah, with these kind of investigations, calling people in for interview, in spite of the ruling in the Harry Miller case about non-crime hate incidents. When we had this thing about non-crime hate incidents, which a lot of people, they would phone up and say, I've been misgendered, this is a non-crime incident, and the police are obliged to report it because the College of Policing guidelines says they should. And now we've had this ruling, and the College of Policing says, oh, well, maybe we can just change the wording and you can carry on doing it as before. That's what it sounds like to me.
Oh, well, that's exactly what they'd like to do. But happily, I don't know if you followed the House of Lords debate recently, there were some really clear comments that this has got to be now something that's got parliamentary scrutiny. There's got to be a code of conduct. We don't know when it's going to happen. We don't know what will happen to all the people like me. I think I've got 3 incidents now recorded against me by Wiltshire. One of them is under the heading of hatred towards a transgender individual. It's a picture of my dog with the caption, "My dog would call me a Nazi for cheese." Now, I could just about see how that might slide into religious hatred, just about, but... And so my poor little dog, he's very cute, by the way, he's now on a police database for 6 years.
This doesn't sound real.
I'm afraid it's very real. And me and Miss B, a teenage girl, have an action against the hate crime guidance. And we've been in limbo for over a year, waiting for the Court of Appeal judgment in Harry Miller's case. So hopefully we can go forward now while we're waiting for this code. OK, so can I just clear something else up as well about this? Because, I mean, we've gone on to the issue of misgendering. That's your choice to use that language. That's your response.
At this current time, when there's such a war on reality and when the police are actually contacting people and saying you're not allowed to talk about safeguarding, I think it's a moral imperative that we completely reject the taboo of misgendering.
So the distinction here is between people who believe that being a woman and being a man, these are identity categories. And they are based on a kind of private feeling or intuition or some kind of what Helen Joyce has described as a kind of sexed soul, a gender identity. And people are free to believe that, surely. They're free to believe in that. And call themselves whatever they want. And I think, if someone says to you, could you use these pronouns for me, I'm not going to have a problem with that.
I defend their right to do it, but you can't change sex. And when sex matters, it really matters.
Yes.
The majority of men are bigger, stronger and faster than the majority of women. Women have consequences because of their female bodies.
Yes.
But, I mean, absolutely, be whatever gender identity you like, but you can't change sex, and we need to be allowed to say this.
One of the reasons I'm clarifying that is because, of course, when Graham uses the word he for someone who identifies as she, you're exercising your free speech because you believe that those pronouns should be reserved for biological sex, not gender identity, basically.
I think it's a form of gaslighting. I think it's a way of making it difficult. Like, we've seen 100 versions of this, but you are constantly now seeing sex offenders, paedophiles being referred to as she in newspapers, in like broadsheets. So these newspapers calling people she are lying to the public, and everyone is like, they are going, like, it's even ending up in stats. Historians are going to look back at this time and wonder why women started becoming paedophiles in such great numbers.
Well, but that's a very good example because, when we look at the prison stats, for instance, and there's a number of male-bodied people who identify as women who are being moved to women's prisons. And people don't believe that's happening, but it is happening. And yet 48% of transgender inmates are there for sexual offences, as compared to 20% of the prison population. So either you have to admit that sex offenders are misusing gender self-ID, exploiting it. In other words, gender self-ID isn't foolproof. Or you have to admit that there's a higher proportion of sex offenders amongst the trans community, which is not true. So clearly gender self-ID is something that can be exploited by abusers, surely.
And on prisons, Kate Coleman told me that that over something like 60% of women in prison have had blunt force trauma to the head administered by a partner, right?
No.
So these are the most vulnerable women.
Now, I can't verify that statistic, I should just say.
Kate Coleman knows her stuff. I promise. I 60%. I don't, but it's around that number. Okay.
I'm just saying that.
Blunt force trauma to the head. So these are very, very vulnerable contingent of women. And apparently, the reason why self-ID was entered into prisons before anywhere else was because campaigners thought, no one cares about prisoners. We'll get that in, and then it'll act as a wedge issue. We'll be able to say, oh look, we've done it in prisons. We can now do it everywhere else. And it was specifically done because no one gives a damn about women in prison.
So then, what do you say to people who come back at you and say, look, this is just all a smokescreen for the transphobia? You just want to erase trans people.
I've given up responding to those arguments because they're not serious arguments. All I'll say is, women in prison, women in rape crisis shelters, like we're talking about the police's attitude to this. The trans-identified male who is now in charge of Rape Crisis Scotland is like they've no intention of getting rid of him. I have had 2 rape victims write to me and say they cannot use rape crisis services in Scotland because they're afraid they'll be called bigots if they ask for a female therapist.
Okay. Well, Sarah, just one final word for you. What do you think is the best way to move this along? Because I have continually attempted to bring people onto this show to defend gender self-ID, and never does someone agree to do it. I've asked representatives from Stonewall again and again, come on and let's hear that other side. And it feels like the debate is not possible.
They can't say it out loud.
No, debate isn't possible. The only thing I think that works is lawfare, although my faith in it has had a bit of a knock, given that the police seem to be not just ignoring the Court of Appeal, but doubling down on their unlawful activities. But we have to take this to the courts. People have to be brave enough to speak out and actually say, I want recognition that what was done was wrong. I want my case to go to court. I don't think that Wiltshire Police should be focusing on me as some kind of hateful bigot. It's a picture of my dog. We, the British, wrote the European Convention of Human Rights. It's such a shocking stain on that really proud achievement that we have to sit here now in 2022 defending an absolute basic and fundamental right. Because if you don't have freedom of speech, you can't protect any of your other rights because you can't talk about them.
Well, I think this is a very complicated and sensitive issue, and I appreciate you both coming on and giving your views. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank my guests. We have reached out, I should say, to GirlGuiding UK and the police in Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire and Merseyside for comment. Nottinghamshire Police said they would not disclose any information in regards to any investigations. Derbyshire Police said there was nothing on their system regarding the matter. Merseyside Police were unable to provide us with a statement today.